Welcome back to XR at Work. It's your favorite extended reality podcast. I'm Scott,
And I'm Dane.
and that's us. Hey, so we got a special guest today, a friend of ours. Dane, tell us who we got today, and let's get this conversation going. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah, we got Nobel Vale. He works in the BioPharma arena, or I don't know what the correct terminology is, Nobel, but he's the XR leader, and I'm excited because we get to talk to somebody outside of the manufacturing types that Scott and I work in on a regular basis. So welcome, Nobel.
Yeah, Scott, Dane, thanks for the opportunity to chat with you guys today. I'm excited.
Yeah, no problem. So to start, do you want to do it kind of your own introduction? I didn't do you justice in the intro there. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we can get into it?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Dane. So introduce everyone. My name is Nobel Vale, and I've been working in the large biopharma industry for over 10 years, almost hitting 11 years now. So currently I'm in a company named Bristol Squibb, and I've been looking at the idea of XR technology, specifically augmented reality and virtual reality, in the last few years from a challenge from someone who said, hey, is there a way we could incorporate these type of technologies in the work environment, right? People think of it as games and, VR, interactive environments and things like that. But could we incorporate those technologies and concepts in a real world setting? Not necessarily biopharma, but it can easily translate into a lot of other industries that you, Scott, and Dane have definitely seen over the years.
No, that's super interesting. So when you guys think, or when you think about the promise of XR technologies, in business, Scott and I, a lot of our stuff is kind of B2B, right? So we're selling to other businesses. I think there's an interesting aspect of this for you because there's a consumer, right, to your guys' product. Do you think that the kind of use of XR extends beyond like the internal operations of the business, like into like a customer base around, trying to educate or, something like that? Do you think it has the most impact kind of internally on, operations day to day?
I think it's a combination of both, right? Because I come from the scientific space and research and development. We looked at a lot of things internally, right?
Mm-hmm.
How to, have interactive work instructions, how to communicate in easier ways. But at the same time, that can translate into other parts of the biopharma business, right? Areas that are customer facing, ones that look at, people in sales, right? To speak about our products or other biopharma products to the public, to healthcare providers, HCPs, and etc. Having interactive experiences is essential because I think I learn a lot through the whole idea of gamification, where you utilize multiple of your five senses to retain knowledge and learn. And I feel essentially that's what XR does.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing something, we're visualizing something, we're hearing something, we're virtually quote unquote touching something. Like it helps us retain all that information that takes in rather than me just, for example, just reading a text or even just listening to something. Having a full immersive experience, I feel really helps in that aspect of learning.
It's interesting too, because I think the medical space is one that, like, I'm no doctor, right? And so being able, Scott's laughing at me, being able to bring that, like, the average, person on the street, right? Kind of, and use this technology to help them better understand how various things are impacting their body. Like, I think that's it's a necessary thing that can be improved, I guess, is the way I would put it. And so I'm super excited that you guys are thinking about that too. I think that's an amazing, step for biopharma in general. So with in the last, month or so, there's been a lot of changes in the space, right? Is there a technology that kind of catches your eye, or headset that's just come out, or the Chat GPT that Scott hates? Like, is there one of these? Is there one of these that you're feeling most excited about that you've seen most recently?
I mean, honestly, I'm open for a lot of those new things and everything, right? You talk about Chat GPT, the whole idea of chatbots, being able to have someone respond based on what you say or what you need, can be done in multiple avenues. Like, I look in the lab environment, if I had a chatbot that was more scientific or chemistry or bio or science or related to biopharma based, where I can ask it basic questions or ask about certain compounds or medical products and things like that, where they can provide some answers, would be great. Looking at XR technology in general and what you can do, I think other things that have caught my eye are, for example, things such as eye tracking. Being able to, I saw some technologies where I put on the headset and then I saw that it took video of my pupils. So it would be able to kind of detect where I would be looking at. And in biopharma, sometimes that's important because we would need to know, for example, maybe some of our patients, maybe where they're looking, where they're concentrating on. How are we letting them see specific directions, for example? How do we make that more prevalent for them to see, right? Other things that I think when you talked about, Scott talked about Dane being a doctor. I mean, the whole idea of learning and performing surgery, for example, I've seen a lot of technology in XR and VR to enable that. The idea of haptics, where I can essentially hold like a scalpel and then I'd have some haptic feedback of when I touch the skin or when I touch some muscle. And I've tried some of this technology already and it's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, I could kind of feel like my hand hitting like the resistance of muscle or skin or bone, right? And then that's something invaluable that surgeons 20 plus years ago didn't have, right? Their testing was either like a cadaver or working alongside a physician during their rotation, right? Having this ability to do it without the severe expense of a cadaver or even the expense of someone really on the table, I think is very valuable there.
Hey, so I got a big question for you. When I think about the industry you're in, Noble, I got to believe that you've got some heavy regulation, right? I mean, this industry is. We think Dana and I talk about this in additive manufacturing that we work in. We have some regulation, right? But we're not in a regulated industry like you're in. I mean, is that just like the bane of your existence, dealing with all the people and processes that tell you no, you can't do this or can't do that, or do you have some freedom there? I mean, kind of how restrictive has that been for you?
I mean, when you look at a high level, yes, there are people that say no or will slow you down or stop you. And it's the idea of that challenge on how to work around that. Not obviously literally working around it, but how do you influence those key stakeholders to say, hey, this is something we need to invest in? Or look at, for anyone that's in any industry, when you look at try to implement this type of technology, what are you capable of doing within that company, right? At a high level, we'd have to make sure, for example, maybe we need appropriate internet connection, right? Or how do we store the data that we capture? If we don't have those things even in play and have a process on how to do it, then you got to start from the bottom up, right? And how do you, when you talk about a regulated environment, are there things that we could implement this technology in a non-regulated space that we would then be able to show to our stakeholders that, hey, there is some value in this, right? Where you can then move forward and go to the next step.
So two things come to mind when you say that. One is, like, it seems important that you guys get started now, right? In the XR space, because if you wait until all that's figured out, it'll be 10 years in the future, right? And I mean, that's for every industry, right? Like, if we waited until the technology is perfect, we're going to miss out on a lot of the value. So I think that's an interesting piece. And then, like, I think some of it comes down to like the hardware manufacturers as well. So I saw something on LinkedIn the other day, and I don't have the source to cite, but where they were using, or the Magic Leap was approved for use by surgeons. And so how do you guys collaborate with hardware, vendors and things like that, so that they, understand kind of those needs? Like Scott and I have, class 1 div 2 needs, right, for like restricted electrical spaces. Do you guys have similar types of conversations with industry leaders on, like, in order for a surgeon to be able to use this technology, it first has to meet X requirement?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you look at the safety standards for wherever these devices are used in. We could look to use devices maybe more of a collaborative meeting space. So there's not necessarily the need of a class 1 div 2. But we do have some labs or manufacturing environments that require that class 1 div 2 environment. And that goes, you look at hardware as one piece and then software as another piece. I can look at hardware in terms of what hardware will work in these specific areas. Once I determine that, is there a software solution that one caters to these pieces of hardware, or is, as a lot of people talk about, being hardware agnostic, right? Where that vendor software can work in multiple different types of headsets. So there's not necessarily a limitation of what needs to be done. And we also look at the hardware in terms of, like, some areas we don't want it to be tethered. We need it to be fully wireless. We need it to be less intrusive to the end users that are actually wearing the headsets, because they are, need to really concentrate on what they're doing, right? So how do we combat those issues or those problems where we can find an intermediate solution to kind of show some proof of concept to illustrate the impact that these devices and these new ways of working can do?
So, like, if you take it, like, the consideration of the hardware and the software and, the things that you talked about, if there was somebody like you that was just getting started, in this space, like, how do you recommend? I imagine, when you started versus when, they're starting nowadays, like, your advice may be different for, how you would have started 5 years ago or whenever, versus today. Like, what are the things that you feel like are important to keep in mind, in the biopharma space, in particular, when you're thinking about getting into XR?
Well, I think, one of my strategies when I look at anything in general is, what is my end goal? What do I want to do? Right? Once I establish that end goal, then it's the idea of pitching to myself or to my team, once maybe I get approval for it. What are the steps to get there? How do I separate those steps into sub goals that I can accomplish? Because you can get your final goal and final product. Now, when I look at the process of getting there, I really need to look into, hey, what does my environment have already? What does it need? And you have to start from a base level, right? Like I mentioned previously, if I need internet connection, then that's the first thing we need to figure out. If I need buy-in to connect devices on a specific network, that's what I have to work on. And it's something that you don't want. I would tell people not to work by yourself on. If this is something that's driven by the business, I would definitely want to involve your IT colleagues, because they're the ones that will help support you in these aspects. Like for me, I'm a scientist, and I look at how to execute the use of this technology. I work with IT colleagues that have to look at the idea of, will these devices work on a specific network? Will they be approved to be on these specific networks? And is the data safe? Because in biopharma, we would work with a lot of very sensitive data and proprietary data that we would have to make sure is secure in however way possible that IT would need to assess.
Yeah, that's something that we hear from pretty much everybody is, it's not, I think traditionally we've thought about like IT and operations or, however it breaks down in the business is like kind of separate things, and you lob it over the fence and then you pick it back up when they've done whatever they do it. And I think there's a much more integrated approach that happens in the XR space. And so I think that's very sage advice is, make sure that your IT folks are along for the ride and able to support. Because, if you get user support, but you can't scale it, then it's not as valuable, right?
Yeah.
What are you seeing out there that you really, really like or want to get into? I mean, kind of going back to Dane's question, is there anything that you're just like, do you think any big gaps that we need to fill or kind of stuff you're waiting for places where you're waiting for the industry to catch up? You've been around a while like we have. I mean, what are you hoping comes out?
Yeah, I think in moving with the idea of haptics, I think having better hand tracking, that's not as intrusive of me wearing like a very thick glove or something like that. I think that could be very helpful, because when you look at a lot of immersive training exercises that could be done in a lab space or manufacturing or even anything that's intricate, how you maneuver your hands and fingers to either maneuver wiring or work with little pieces of items is essential. And over the years, sometimes it gets very clunky when you're trying to grab something and you barely grab it, but it shows it's grabbed, or you don't actually go through the motion of actually putting your hand out and grabbing it. Right? Sometimes you just put your hand over it and it'll detect that you have it. Yeah. When you incorporate haptics to it, then you can also feel that resistance there. And I think if the technology is able to really push forward with that, the ideas of immersive training and virtual training can be limitless, right? So,
are you doing a lot of virtual stuff? Are you more AR or VR? Kind of, what's that mix look like for you? Seems like everyone gives us a different answer to that, Noble.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, I'm looking at it in different ways, where we can look at the AR piece where it's not as intrusive, like we still see the physical world, and how do we leverage that to communicate more ideally? How do we use that to capture data automatively, right? Instead of the idea of writing things down and stopping what I'm doing to document something. Can I do like an adaptive voice to text? Can I have my camera just pan over a screen or a machine and automatically capture data? Or can I say a trigger word that I have my headset connected to a network that is connected to the pieces of equipment that I have around me, and have it automatically capture data and save it into a proper place, rather than having to put in keys on a computer or something like that? Looking at the automative part of it, right? And then the other piece of the VR piece, that's the idea of, and I have a lot of people that look into this, not just me, which they have done a great job in kind of being in the forefront of different lab virtual experiences, where people can learn in bulk how to do things without actually being in the lab environment, where I'm not using consumables like chemicals and things like that are very expensive or potentially not safe. If I make a mistake in a virtual environment, hey, I could just end, or I have game over and I start a new game.
Start over.
If I'm in a real environment and I make a mistake that could be, health hazard, there can be a lot more involved than just trying to start over. So I think it also incorporates a good level of safety for people that are very new to what they want to learn.
That's super interesting. So I think, we've talked about this before too. Like when you're looking for your first VR use case, right? The thing that I always recommend to people is, I wouldn't go for something that's like hugely scalable, because scale is really hard. But like if you find something like what you're talking about with the consumables, where there's an ability to tie the consumables used back to savings in VR, then it's easy to be able to tie that back to value or dollars or however you want to put that. And
Yeah.
so that buys you the the will to move forward and move into other additional projects. So that I think is really a key thing too. How do you guys do anything with like medical like schools as far as like how to train doctors on how to do things, or is it mostly focused on internal development for like the lab, for instance?
I've looked mostly things internally. I haven't really looked at the medical school space or how it can be beneficial there. But as we talked about before, I think if haptics and hand tracking are optimized even more, it's something that medical schools, I think, can definitely look to utilize there.
It's crazy to think about, like, if you could cut your medical school time in half or something because you have a much more effective or immersive tool to be able to learn on. Makes you wonder, like, how does that change? How does the rate of learning change the structure of things like the medical profession, or even like I went to school for engineering. It took me 4 years to get my engineering degree, and most of what I learned was in experiential things like internships and co-ops and stuff like that. So it just makes me wonder, like, how does that change the education system, right, from an experiential perspective?
I think it's crazy because, when you look at medical school and things like that, you obviously have a lot of medical professionals that would, teach these students on how to do things. Now you have to incorporate the idea of the VR development and programming, right? Yep. Whether it's outsourcing it to either some companies or some vendors, or developing internally and hiring internal talent to really develop these modules on how to do it. It's really a shift in the workforce that has to put everything together. And yeah, it's crazy because you'd have to look at how you buy in that change and how to do it slowly but surely, because we can think like, oh, this needs to happen tomorrow, right? But when you look at what needs to be done on the outside and holistically, it's going to take a while.
Well, so sorry, Scott, I'm getting into it now. So
he's awake now, Noble.
That's right. Yeah,
I triggered something in Dane.
That's right. So Noble, you mentioned something interesting there around like internal talent versus going externally and other things, and I'm interested in your perspective on this because I think there's a lot of practitioners that are trying to answer this question, which is do I find really good partners in the space and partner with them to build all this content. Problem is it's generally expensive, right? Because content's not cheap. Or do I look at upskilling people inside of my organization, which obviously takes time, and you're pulling somebody from another important job that they were doing before, but they also have the understanding of how things work internal to your own business. So I'm interested, like, how do you think about where I imagine you probably use both, or how are you thinking about that problem?
Yeah, what's that mix look like for you guys?
Yeah, so what I would say is definitely, especially in a company that doesn't really concentrate on the XR space, I would definitely leverage external partners and vendors to kind of create that content for you, because you don't have that expertise internally. Maybe another industry that might have some personnel that have some type of VR gaming Unity development can look to create these modules for you, right? It's a combination of leveraging maybe your vendors that you have to create what you want, and maybe leveraging, like, for example, a branding team, right? How do you want this virtual module to look? And then find that happy medium in creating one or two modules. And one thing I'll say too is I would suggest finding a vendor that when they create this content, it's owned by you, not necessarily owned by the vendor, because then that can be tricky, especially when you want to go internal, because then if you don't own that content, then you can't look to modify it. Right. But if you can get an agreement with a group that you own the content that's created, and then after they give it to you, hey, if you have internal personnel that maybe can help edit it and modify it as time goes by, that could be a happy medium in itself. Because I feel in a company that doesn't have experience in the XR space, you need something tangible that they can relate to look at and say, hey, this is something I would want to invest in. What do we do right now versus what do we want to do in 5 years? Right.
Yeah.
And is it something that we can scale with that vendor? Maybe we just completely leave it outsourced. Or do we do a hybrid where maybe we can leverage or hire maybe one or two internal, maybe people internally, they can work closely with the vendor, and then we can kind of make an assessment there if we want to just invest heavily internally or kind of keep that hybrid style.
Yeah, that's interesting too, and I wonder if it'll mature like computers did, or phones, or whatever, where it's like when your first website, and Scott will relate to this because he's an early web guy, like when the web first came out, like you had developers that you'd pay to build your website, right? And like you likely wouldn't have an internal front end team to do it. Like you'd start with bringing somebody in to build it. And then eventually, and nowadays, it's like everybody has some kind of internal team, that works on their website and all that stuff. And so, wonder if that's the same transition we'll see over time in the XR space if it becomes.
But you got to believe we are, yeah.
No, I 100% agree. And I think one simple thing is social media. Like maybe 10 years ago, you wouldn't think companies would have maybe their own social media department or things like that. But with how social media has grown, companies need their own like social media manager, things like that, to do posts, vet posts, interact with people to grow the business. Right. And I think when more companies look at incorporating XR, you'll need that personnel to help support it, whether it's people in IT, people in the business, or et cetera. Right.
So no, we all speak a lot. I mean, obviously, we met at AES, which is, I think, the best XR show that happens every year in North America. But I got to tell you, man, I was on stage one time, and the moderator asked, point blank to all the panelists, and we were a bunch of different brands up there and buyers, and this moderator said, are you open and willing to work with outsourced vendors? Do you use outsourced vendors? And we're all like, oh, this is a loaded question, because everyone's like, yeah, we do. And I mean, we just got bombarded coming off the stage. It's like, open season on us coming off there, right? But I mean, we work with partners as well. But I think partners are like you're saying, Noble. I mean, you want to make sure you got ones that are going to work with you the way you want to work, and you get that the assets are owned by the right side of the equation there, and it's a real partnership, not just someone taking your money, building you something that they hold you hostage with, and you can never get updated. You don't want that.
Oh yeah, and it's not an easy thing, right? You can think about a lot of these vendors have their key modules or key demos that they want to share. You have to try and ask the right questions to figure out, hey, how long did it take for you to do these modules, or how interactive are they? Like how much are these really just the smoke and mirrors of what you want to show us, the bright lights and things like that? Because coming in BioPharma, the bright lights are nice, the interactive graphics and it looking pretty is good, but I really want to look at the execution. Right. If it executes well, then hey, we can look at the visuals later.
Dane knows one of my big pet peeves, right, is development shops that show fancy CGI sizzle reels to the executives at my company, and then my executives look at me and they want me to go put Iron Man in place in one of our factories.
I know.
It's like, it's like I don't know what you saw on YouTube or in a customer experience lab, but reality is we have a different environment than that studio that produced that.
I mean, you talk about Iron Man, like you think of Jarvis and things like
that.
Yeah, it's like the chatbot that could be used and things like that. It's crazy. But can we do that? Like, slow it down a little bit.
One other thing that struck me as you were talking there too is, because it's such a new space, I think we're going to find that we have to partner with groups that may not be traditional partners in the industry that we're in. Right. So like, if you think about Invista, where I work, like it's not a common partnership to have Invista partner with a game engine like Unity to be able to build, tools that are valuable for us. And so that's one thing that I've tried to keep an open mind to. And like one of the reasons why it's so nice, knowing you, Noble, and being able to reach out to you as well, is I think that we're going to learn so much from various industries outside of the domain that we work in, and it'll be applicable to everybody. And so that's why it's important to have a community and all that stuff around you as you're navigating the waters of XR.
Yeah, no, I mean, you look at the different subcultures in business that we look at, or even consumer versus enterprise space, right? You see vendor companies these days, they have consumer, headsets, enterprise headsets. They're really thinking about how, the differences are and what caters to those different communities. And when you look at enterprise, some of the big things are device management. How do you manage all these devices? How do you manage the amount of users that have access to a certain module or certain things and aspects of that nature? And how do these companies work with enterprise, where some enterprise companies may have those vigorous IT or cybersecurity reviews that you really have to invest time to figure out? Because you look at maybe some headsets that are under, I don't want to say names, but when you
I think we know what you're talking about.
Headsets that are under certain companies, you have to think, will that go through a cybersecurity review with a big corporate company? Sometimes that's the barrier that you just say, nope, don't even consider it.
There's a lot of innovative, nimble stuff happening in the software world by, three guys in a dorm room. I can't get them approved through my security group, to host our corporate proprietary data,
Yeah. Well, so I have one more question for you, Noble, and then we'll wrap up here in a second.
Yeah.
Then this will be the hardball of the whole discussion, which is,
all right,
if you had to predict, like, say, what does this space look like in 5 years? Like, what do you think? And I know that's like an impossible thing to ask, right? So the expectation isn't that you actually know, but I'm just interested in how you're thinking about the future, of the space, working in the space you do.
I think there definitely is a lot of promise in the space, and in 5 years, there's definitely going to be a lot of great forward progress. I feel it's going to be more defined, where we kind of get those smoke and mirror companies kind of vetted out, because they've kept trying, and it just haven't been succeeding. And we're going to start seeing some tangible things. It's just going to take time and get people and the general public to buy in and not see those smoke and mirrors and kind of think about different ideas. In 5 years, I think like even in my current company and a lot of other companies, there's gonna be some good work that comes out of it, because there's definitely a lot of enough passionate people that kind of have a good idea on the flow and timelines and things like that to really get a lot of these technologies rolling and out there.
Gotcha.
I'm excited.
Yeah, no, I think we should all be excited, and I think it's really cool, like I said, to have a community of people to talk to and pontificate about what the future of this technology is and how people interact with it. So
yeah.
Noble, thank you so much. Like, you're awesome, man. Every time we talk to you,
nice guy, man.
Yeah, every time we talk to you, it's insightful for me, and we appreciate you being part of the community too, and being willing to spend some time with us today.
Hey, thank you so much, Scott, Dane. It was a pleasure to be here on the podcast, and hey, I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Where can people find you? Are you going to be at any shows this year? AWE, AES, anything?
Still figuring out where I'll be, but if I'll be somewhere, I'll definitely make sure I announce it. So it'll be good.
All right, yeah. Well, great. We want to remind everyone that we are now on YouTube at XR at Work. If you're watching this on YouTube, we also encourage you, if you consume podcasts on Spotify, XR at Work is on Spotify as well. We've got great guests like Noble and others that join us, and we just love trying to foster the sense of community in the extended reality space. So, Noble, again, thank you, and we look forward to having you back on and giving us updates in the future, buddy.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Have a great day, everybody.
All right.